I knew something inside me had changed the moment my wife looked at me, as if she were seeing a ghost. Wide-eyed, breath caught halfway in her throat, yet she wasn't staring at anything shocking. She was staring at me. Or rather, the version of me I had tried so hard to hide that it finally started slipping through the cracks on its own. It began long before that moment, long before the trembling of her hands or the silence that wrapped around us like an unexpected storm. It began on a morning so ordinary it shouldn't have mattered. I was brushing my teeth, half awake, when I saw my reflection flicker, not literally, but in that instinctive way where the person in the mirror suddenly feels like a stranger wearing your face. My jaw looked sharper than I remembered, my hair refused to fall into place, and my shoulders felt like armor I never signed up to carry. I stood there, blinking, confused by the sudden heaviness of being me, in a world that expected me to perform masculinity like it was a job I couldn't resign from. I didn't say anything to my wife at first. She was humming in the kitchen, pouring coffee, the sound of her spoon tapping gently against the mug like a rhythm she'd carved into our routine. I thought I could shake the feeling off, like dust on a collar, but it lingered. All day. All week. As if something inside me was whispering a forgotten truth, one that had waited patiently for years for the courage to speak up. The whispers grew louder when I opened the old storage box in the attic, a box I hadn't touched since my teenage years. Among the tangled cords and forgotten notebooks lay a scarf. Soft, pink, lighter than anything I'd ever let myself wear. I didn't remember keeping it. Maybe I hid it. Maybe I needed it long before I knew why. When I wrapped it around my neck, the feeling hit me so hard I had to sit down, an overwhelming mix of relief and guilt, of belonging and betrayal. It felt right, and that terrified me. In the days that followed, I found myself doing things I couldn't explain, moisturizing my hands with a kind of tender focus I didn't know I had, watching my expressions in the mirror as if memorizing a different version of myself, adjusting the way I stood, my weight shifting from one leg to the other in a way that felt softer, natural, real. But the fear of being found out clung to me like static. My wife, perceptive as always, noticed every small shift. The way I hesitated before speaking. The way I seemed almost startled by my own voice. The way my eyes lingered on things I used to overlook. One evening, everything collided. She walked into the room right as I was experimenting, just a little eyeliner, just enough to sharpen the line where my lashes met the world. I wasn't trying to be someone else. I was trying to meet someone I had ignored for too long. I froze. She froze. For a second, the air didn't move. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at me, not at the eyeliner, not at the awkward half-shadows smudged on my eyelid, but at the emotion I hadn't managed to hide. The longing, the fear, the fragile bloom of something new yet strangely familiar. "What are you feeling right now?" she finally whispered. And that's when everything spilled. The truth I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The confusion. The aching sensation of becoming someone I didn't fully understand yet. The pull toward femininity that wasn't about imitation or fantasy. It was about authenticity, like discovering the shape of a melody that had been humming inside me since childhood. But she wasn't angry. She wasn't judging me. No, her expression held something that surprised me more than anything else. Concern, yes, but also gentleness. Like she was seeing not a stranger, but a version of me that had been knocking at the door for far too long. My hands trembled as I wiped the smudge from my eyelid, but she caught my wrist before I could finish. Her touch was soft, careful, as if acknowledging something sacred I didn't know I'd shown her. "I just want to understand," she said quietly. "Please let me in." Her voice undid me. It unlocked a door I had kept sealed for decades. In that moment, sitting on the edge of the bed with my wife, the remnants of eyeliner on my fingertips, my pulse racing, I realized my life was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. Not because I had chosen a new path, but because I had finally stopped running from one. And beneath all of it, beneath the fear, the hope, the tremor of possibility, I sensed something else too. A shift. A beginning. A story I had never planned to live, but now couldn't imagine avoiding. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear exactly, but because of the strange, delicate calm that settled over me after the conversation, like the air right before dawn when everything is still deciding what it wants to become. My wife had fallen asleep curled slightly toward me, one hand resting lightly on my chest as if anchoring me to something familiar, something shared. But I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying my own words, my own trembling voice, over and over until they didn't feel like confessions anymore. They felt like truths I had finally allowed to breathe. The next morning, I expected everything to be awkward, tense, fragile. But she walked into the living room with 2 mugs of tea instead of coffee. She knew tea calmed me more, even though I rarely admitted it, and she set one in front of me with a cautious smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was trying. I could see the effort woven into every small movement. It made my heart twist in a way I couldn't name. "We don't have to talk about anything if you're not ready," she said, sitting across from me. "But if you are, I'm here." The kindness in her voice was almost disarming. I nodded slowly, fingers curling around the warm ceramic of the mug. "I don't know what's happening to me," I admitted. "It doesn't feel like a phase. It doesn't feel random. It feels like something I pushed away for years without realizing what I was doing." She studied me for a long moment, and in that moment, I felt more exposed than I had the night before. Not because of makeup or clothes, but because she was looking directly into the space where my certainty used to live. "Can I ask something?" she said carefully.
"Yeah."
"When you looked in the mirror last night before I walked in, what were you hoping to see?" The question hit deeper than I expected. I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. "I don't know if I was hoping," I whispered. "It was more like I was searching for someone I've always felt inside, but didn't have the courage to meet face to face." She didn't interrupt. She didn't even shift in her chair. She let the words land exactly where they needed to. "Do you feel lighter when you lean into that side of yourself?" she asked. I nodded. Lighter. More aligned. Like the world becomes slightly quieter for a moment. Her expression softened, not with pity, but with something closer to understanding. "Then maybe you should explore it," she said gently. "Not because I expect anything, but because you deserve to know who you really are." Hearing those words was like a door opening somewhere behind my ribcage. Relief washed over me in a slow, cautious wave. But tangled in that relief was a quiet fear, because the more I explored, the more I risked changing everything. Over the next few days, nothing dramatic happened. No grand revelations. No sudden transformation. Just small moments, quiet experiments, tentative steps. My wife and I talked more than we had in months about identity, about expression, about the difference between wanting to be someone and wanting permission to exist as yourself. She asked questions not out of doubt, but out of genuine curiosity. And for the first time, I didn't lie to myself when answering them. One evening, after another long conversation, she surprised me. "I've been thinking," she said, disappearing into the bedroom for a moment before returning with a small box. Not a fancy one, just white cardboard with a slightly dented corner. "If you're comfortable, maybe you could try these?" Inside were a few items she no longer used: soft lip balms, a light-tinted moisturizer, and a hair clip shaped like a tiny silver leaf. My breath caught, the way it had the night she first saw me with eyeliner. "You don't have to," she said quickly, holding the box closer to her chest for a moment, almost protectively. "I just thought, maybe it could help you understand what you're feeling." I reached out and took it from her hands. The box felt impossibly light, yet the moment felt indescribably heavy, like I was holding not makeup, but permission. Possibility. A quiet affirmation that I wasn't wandering through this alone. When I clipped the silver leaf into my hair that night, something inside me shifted again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even immediately noticeable. But it was there, a soft, undeniable click, like a puzzle piece settling where it had always belonged. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a stranger. For the first time, I saw a version of me that didn't make my chest tighten or my jaw clench. A version of me that felt gentle, present, true. And that scared me more than anything yet. Because once you see yourself clearly, really clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't go back. And I wasn't sure what that meant for my marriage, my identity, or the life I had built. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke with the unusual sensation that my dreams had followed me into daylight. Not as vivid images, but as a quiet awareness, like my mind had finally stopped fighting itself. I reached up instinctively and felt the tiny hair clip still tucked behind my ear, slightly crooked from sleep. A flutter of warmth spread through me. It was such a small thing, but it anchored me in a way I couldn't explain. My wife noticed it immediately when she walked in. She paused in the doorway, her eyes softening just a little. Not startled, not confused, just noticing. Like she was witnessing a shift in the weather. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. I nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. I had slept lightly, aware of every sensation, every breath. But for once, the restlessness didn't feel like dread. It felt like anticipation. She moved closer, reaching up gently to straighten the clip. Her fingers brushed my hair, and the tenderness of that gesture nearly unraveled me. "It suits you," she said quietly. A simple comment. A small truth. But it echoed in my chest long after she stepped back. That day, I kept catching my reflection in places I never used to: windows, the microwave door, even the blank screen of my phone. I wasn't admiring myself. I wasn't checking for mistakes. I was observing something in motion, something unsteady but undeniably alive. My posture had softened. My gestures felt more fluid, less rehearsed. I wasn't performing. I was uncovering. My wife noticed the changes too, though she tried to pretend she didn't. She kept watching me like she was seeing me for the first time in a long time, not with suspicion, but with a kind of cautious curiosity. In the evenings, when the house felt quiet and safe, she would ask questions. Soft ones, careful ones. What does it feel like when you lean into that side of yourself? Is this something you've felt all your life, even if you didn't have the words? Does it ever scare you just how right it feels? The last question hit me the hardest because the answer was yes. Terrifyingly yes. One night, sitting on the couch under the soft glow of the lamp, I finally admitted something that had been growing in me for weeks. "I feel like I'm standing in the doorway between two lives," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "One I've lived, and one I've never allowed myself to imagine." She listened carefully, her expression unreadable but not cold. Her thumb traced slow circles on the cushion beside her, tiny gestures she made only when she was processing something deeply. "And which side of the doorway feels like home?" she asked. My breath caught. The truth rose before I could stop it. "The one I've never imagined." Silence expanded between us, thick, fragile, alive. Then she looked up with eyes that shimmered with something more complex than fear, something almost like recognition. "Then we'll figure it out," she said. "One step at a time." Those 4 words should have calmed me. Instead, they cracked open another layer of emotion I hadn't prepared for. Because figuring it out meant confronting questions I wasn't ready to answer. What did this mean for our marriage? For the life we had built? For the version of me she had loved all these years? She must have sensed the spiral forming in my mind, because she reached for my hand, grounding me before the thoughts could consume me. "Listen," she said softly. "You're not breaking anything. You're revealing something. There's a difference." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of honesty. "I don't know where this is going," she continued. "I won't pretend I'm not scared. But I'm more scared of watching you hide from yourself again." The vulnerability in her words hit me harder than anything yet. She wasn't simply supportive. She was invested. Afraid. Hopeful. Human. That night, after she went to bed, I lingered in the living room. The shadows felt softer somehow, like they weren't hiding me. They were holding me. I went to the mirror again, that now familiar ritual of confronting my reflection. The silver hair clip glimmered faintly. My features looked the same as always, yet different. Or maybe I was finally seeing rather than judging. I lifted my hand, tracing the line of my cheekbone, the gentle slope of my jaw, the way my lips relaxed without the old tension. For the first time, I imagined what it would be like not to resist these softer instincts, but to let them guide me. And the thought didn't terrify me. It soothed me. As I stood there, framed by the quiet and the dim glow of the lamp, I realized something profound. I wasn't transforming into someone else. I was returning to who I didn't yet know. But I was certain of one thing. My life was no longer waiting to change. It had already begun. The shift from curiosity to reality happened quietly, so quietly that if I hadn't been paying such close attention to myself, I might have missed it. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a sudden transformation. It was the way small details began to feel less like experiments and more like habits. The way my shoulders naturally lowered when I walked. The way my voice softened when I wasn't trying to hold it steady. The way my hands moved when I spoke, tracing gentler arcs in the air. Little things, but little things add up. One evening, I found myself standing in front of my closet, staring at the neat line of shirts I had worn for years. They all looked the same, structured, stiff, square. Uniforms of a role I had learned to play without question. I touched the fabric of one sleeve and felt a strange heaviness, as if the shirt belonged to a person I used to know. My wife walked in behind me so quietly I didn't hear her at first. When I turned, she was watching me, her expression thoughtful, but not intrusive. "I've never seen you stare at your clothes like you're planning a rebellion," she said softly. I smiled weakly, but the truth weighed too much to pretend. "They don't feel like mine anymore." She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Then what does feel like you?" The question hung between us, trembling with possibility. I didn't have an answer, not a clear one, but I felt it somewhere inside, like a faint outline waiting to be drawn. "I don't know yet," I whispered. "Something softer. Something that doesn't feel like armor." Her eyes softened even more. She studied me the way an artist studies a canvas, not to judge, but to understand what already exists beneath the surface. "Wait here," she said suddenly. She disappeared into the hallway, and for a moment I stood alone, the closet gaping open behind me like a doorway to a life that no longer fit. When she returned, she held something behind her back, a single garment draped over her arm. She looked almost nervous, a rare expression for her. "I want to show you something," she said quietly. She revealed it in one slow movement, a simple, flowing tunic she rarely wore anymore. Soft fabric, muted color, loose shape. Nothing extravagant, just beautifully gentle. My breath caught. "I thought," she hesitated, searching my face. "I thought this might feel closer to what you're reaching for." My throat tightened. I took it from her hands carefully, almost reverently. The fabric felt delicate against my skin, like a whisper of comfort I hadn't known I needed. "I don't want you to feel pressured," she added quickly. "This isn't a test, or a step you have to take tonight. I wanted you to have the option." No one had ever given me permission like that before, not directly, not implicitly, and certainly not with this much compassion. "I want to try it," I said before fear could steal the words. She smiled, a small, cautious smile, but real. "Take your time. I'll be in the living room." When she closed the door behind her, the room suddenly felt very still. I looked at the tunic in my hands, the soft drape of it, the quiet invitation it carried. A wave of nerves rose in me, but beneath it was something stronger, an undeniable pull. I slipped it over my head. It settled around my body lightly, the fabric moving with me instead of against me. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Not from shame or fear, but from the overwhelming sense of alignment, comfort, relief. When I turned toward the mirror, I braced myself for shock, for confusion, for some sense of seeing a stranger. But that's not what I saw. I saw someone who looked, finally, at ease. Not dramatically different. Not unrecognizable. Just more me than I expected. My throat tightened with emotion. My eyes burned. I stood there, staring at my reflection, willing myself to breathe, to stay grounded in this moment that felt both impossibly fragile and astonishingly right. A soft knock broke the silence. "Are you okay?" my wife asked gently through the door. I swallowed hard, then opened it slowly. The moment she saw me, something in her face melted. Surprise, yes, but also empathy, awe, and something deeper I couldn't name. Not loss, not fear. Something more like witnessing. "You look," she paused, searching again for the right word. "You look like you exhaled for the first time." Her reaction undid me, not because she approved, but because she understood. That was more rare, more precious than I could have imagined. "I don't know what this means," I whispered, my voice shaking. "But it feels honest." She stepped closer and placed a hand on my cheek, her thumb brushing lightly along my skin. Her touch was warm, steady, like a lighthouse guiding a drifting ship back to itself. "Then let's honor that honesty," she said softly, "wherever it leads." I felt a tremor run through me, half fear, half hope. She reached for my hand and pulled me gently into the living room. "Come sit with me," she said. "Tell me everything you're feeling." And for the first time in my life, I didn't hold back. Not one word, not one truth. Because this wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point. Quiet, profound, irreversible. I didn't realize how much I had been holding back until I began to speak. The words came out uneven, trembling, like they had been stored too long in a locked room. My wife listened without interrupting, her expression soft, her hands folded loosely in her lap, as if ready to steady me if I wavered. "I feel like I've been borrowing a life," I said, my voice raw. "Like I've been acting out a version of myself that everyone expected, and I didn't even question why. But every time I let myself soften, even just a little, it feels like something inside me aligns." She nodded gently, absorbing every syllable. "Have you felt this way before?" "Even faintly." "Always," I whispered. But I didn't know how to name it. I didn't know how to let myself acknowledge it. I paused, the memory surfacing slowly, painfully. "When I was a kid," I continued, "I used to imagine what it would be like to belong differently. Not louder, not braver, just softer. Like there was a version of me waiting in some hidden room I never had the courage to open." Her eyes glistened with a kind of quiet understanding that felt almost too generous. "That hidden room isn't imaginary," she said softly. "You just never had someone standing outside it saying you were allowed to enter." Her words made my chest tighten. Not painfully, just heavily, like the pressure before tears. We sat like that for a long moment, the silence between us filled with unspoken truths. Then she leaned forward slightly, studying me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "How do you feel in the tunic?" she asked. I glanced down at the soft fabric draped around me. It wasn't dramatic or glamorous. It wasn't even particularly feminine. But it was gentle, flowing in a way that let my body exist without the rigid lines I'd been hiding behind. "I feel released," I said slowly, like I'm not fighting myself. Her shoulders eased, as if she had been holding her breath too. "That's important," she murmured. "More important than either of us knows right now." But even as she said it, a ripple of fear moved through me. "What if this changes too much?" I asked, the words heavy. "What if I'm becoming someone you didn't sign up for?" The question felt dangerous, like stepping out onto thin ice and waiting to hear the crack. But she didn't look afraid. She didn't pull away. Instead, she touched my hand lightly, grounding me again. "You're not becoming someone else," she said. "You're uncovering parts of you I haven't met yet. But there's still you." I blinked hard, overwhelmed by the kindness in her voice. "And I'm not disappearing," she added, her tone firm but gentle. "I just need honesty from you. Not answers. Not certainty. Just honesty." For a moment, that reassurance soothed the fear. But then a new thought surfaced. Quieter, more haunting. What if I go further than either of us expect? This time, she didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted briefly to the floor, her fingers brushing the fabric of the couch in a slow, thoughtful pattern. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but serious. "Then we take it one step at a time," she said. "I won't pretend I'm not scared. I am. but I'm more afraid of watching you shrink yourself just to protect me." Her honesty shook something loose inside me, something deep, vulnerable and long buried. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for not looking away." She gave a small, sad smile. "I'm looking right at you, and I want you to look at yourself with the same compassion." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed awake again, sitting in the dim glow of the lamp, wrapped in the soft tunic, my thoughts swirling like slow-moving currents. I looked down at my hands, hands that had always been instruments of practicality, of work, of responsibility. But tonight they looked different. Not literally, but in the way I perceived them. More expressive, more delicate than I had allowed them to be. Like I was finally noticing a language my body had been speaking in whispers. When I finally stood and walked toward the mirror, I felt a tremor of anticipation. Not fear this time, but a tug of recognition. The person in the reflection didn't look transformed. Not in any dramatic way. But something beneath the surface had undeniably shifted. The softness wasn't only in the clothes. It was in my posture, my gaze, the quiet calm settling across my features. A question rose in me, one I hadn't dared to articulate until now. Who am I when I stop pretending? I didn't know the answer yet. But for the first time, I wasn't running from it. I was walking toward it, step by gentle step. I didn't realize how quietly my life had been rearranging itself until the changes began echoing beyond the walls of our home. Small shifts that once felt harmless now carried weight, like tiny ripples that eventually reached the shore with surprising force. My movements, my voice, my presence, everything was softening in ways I hadn't consciously chosen. It wasn't performance. It wasn't imitation. It was emergence. And yet, every step forward brought a new layer of tension I hadn't anticipated. The first moment I sensed the world noticing was at the grocery store. I was standing in the produce aisle, absently brushing my hair behind my ear, a gesture that felt natural now, effortless, when I caught someone watching me. A stranger. A quick glance, nothing more. But the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes made my stomach twist. Did they see something different about me? Something unfinished? Something I was only beginning to understand myself? My wife met me at the end of the aisle with a basket in hand, unaware of the knot tightening in my chest. She told me we needed tomatoes. I nodded too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. She noticed, but she didn't push. She had learned the rhythm of my inner storms, how they rose without warning and retreated just as silently. When we got home, I retreated to the bedroom before she could ask what was wrong. I closed the door gently and sat on the edge of the bed, my pulse racing. The tunic I'd worn the night before still hung on the back of the chair, soft and inviting. I stared at it, feeling both drawn and frightened by it. I wasn't afraid of the clothing itself. I was afraid of what it revealed, how easily I slipped into comfort I once thought impossible. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Can I come in?" my wife asked through the door. I hesitated, then whispered, "Yeah." She stepped inside, her expression warm but attentive. "You disappeared on me." "I just needed a minute," I murmured. She sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "What happened?" I inhaled slowly, releasing the truth I'd tried to swallow. "Someone looked at me today. Really looked." I paused, choosing my words carefully. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what they were seeing. Her hand found mine. "What do you think they saw?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Someone softer? Someone changing?" The words trembled in the air. "And I'm not ready to explain it. Not to anyone." She nodded, pressing her thumb gently against my palm. "You don't owe anyone explanations. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Her reassurance should have soothed me, but the unease lingered, wrapped around me like invisible threads. "I feel like I'm stepping into a new version of myself," I said quietly. "But I'm terrified that the world will see me before I'm ready to see myself." Her voice softened. "Then we move carefully. You don't have to jump. You can tiptoe." I exhaled shakily, the fear loosening just a little. "Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "You're allowed to grow at your own pace. No finish line. No deadline." But even as she spoke, the deeper truth pressed against my ribs. Growing means changing. And changing means confronting parts of myself I had buried so deeply I barely recognized them. That night, I took the tunic from the chair and held it again, hesitation in one hand, longing in the other. I didn't put it on. I didn't need to. Just holding it told me everything. I wasn't fighting the softness anymore. I was craving it. As days passed, new habits formed quietly, like petals unfolding without being told how. My gestures became gentler. My laughter felt lighter. I started parting my hair differently. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed the subtle shift in how I moved through the world. My wife noticed too. One night, while we were washing dishes, she paused mid-rinse and tilted her head thoughtfully. "You know," she said casually, "your smile's been different lately." I nearly dropped the plate in my hands. "Different how?" She shrugged lightly. "More open. Like you're not bracing for something anymore." Her observation struck me deeper than she realized. Because she was right. My smile had changed. It wasn't the smile of a man rehearsing himself into existence. It was the smile of someone no longer carrying the weight of pretending. But with each new layer of authenticity came a new layer of fear. One evening, sitting across from her on the couch, I finally voiced the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface. "What if I'm changing too much?" I asked softly. "What if I reach a point where you don't recognize me anymore?" She looked up sharply, her eyes warm but unwavering. "Stop assuming my love depends on you staying the same." My breath caught. "That's not what this is," she continued. "I'm not losing you. I'm meeting you." Her words were careful, tender, but serious. And in their honesty, I heard something I hadn't expected. She was adapting too. She was growing with me, not just watching me grow. But growth for both of us meant confronting truths neither of us had planned for. "You're scared," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. "Of course I'm scared. Change is scary." She took a slow breath. "But I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of not knowing where this journey leads." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. "I'm scared too." "Good," she said softly. "Then we can be scared together." Her smile trembled just slightly, the kind of tremble that only appears when someone is trying to be brave and vulnerable at the same time. And that moment, more than any mirror, any tunic, any quiet self-discovery, made me realize something. This wasn't a solo transformation. It was a shared evolution. We were navigating the unknown together, step by tentative step. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I walked into the bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror greeted me with the same familiar face, but somehow it felt different. Not because the reflection had changed, but because the person looking into it was finally willing to witness themselves without flinching. I touched the edge of the sink, steadying myself, and whispered into the quiet, "It's okay. You're allowed to become." The words felt strange at first, then warm, then real. And for the first time, I realized this journey wasn't about replacing who I'd been. It was about uncovering who I had always been. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but truthfully. And truth, I was learning, has its own kind of beauty. The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, warm and golden, but I hardly noticed it at first. My hands were wrapped around the mug my wife had poured for me, the steam curling upward in a way that seemed almost alive. I didn't know if it was the tea or the quiet domesticity that made my chest ache with a strange mixture of comfort and apprehension. I was awake now, not just awake in body, but awake in a sense that I hadn't been for years. Every nerve, every thought, every heartbeat seemed sharper, more acute, like I was tuning into a world I had only ever skimmed before. She watched me as I sipped, not intrusively, but with the same quiet curiosity she'd shown since the night of my first tentative reveal. Her gaze held something I couldn't name, pride, yes, but also something softer, more fragile, like She was daring herself to be present in this unfamiliar territory. And that terrified me almost as much as it comforted me. Because her acceptance was real, but so was the fear that I might tip too far and fall beyond the reach of her understanding. "I thought we could go out today," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Just somewhere simple. A walk. Maybe a little shopping. Nothing complicated." The suggestion hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't considered leaving the house yet, not dressed in the tunic, not with this new version of myself. The thought of stepping into public felt like stepping into a mirror that could shatter at any moment. I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted, my voice low. The words felt like fragile glass, trembling as they left my mouth. "People will see me. They'll notice. And I'm not sure I can handle that yet." Her hand covered mine, grounding me instantly. "Then we don't go," she said, gently but firmly. "But I think you could. And I think we both know it." Her thumb brushed the back of my hand with a careful, steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat syncing with mine. "You don't have to be ready for the world. Just for yourself." Her words stayed with me, echoing softly as I finished the tea and placed the mug down. I realized that stepping outside wasn't about anyone else. It was about acknowledging the person in the mirror as fully present, even when the world wasn't watching. And that was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. A thrill so pure I almost laughed, except the sound caught in my throat instead. We decided to start small. The neighborhood park. A walk along familiar paths. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could attract attention. And yet, every step toward the door felt monumental. My heart thudded in my chest, my stomach fluttered, and my hands shook slightly as I smoothed the tunic over my shoulders one last time. When we stepped outside, the air hit differently than it ever had before. It wasn't just fresh. It was alive, electric with possibility. The wind caught the edges of the fabric, and I felt a strange sort of liberation in the way it moved, as if it had been waiting decades to follow the contours of my body without restraint. My wife reached for my hand, her grip firm, her fingers warm, and that connection grounded me in ways words couldn't. People passed us on the sidewalk. Some glanced our way, casually, some not at all. And for a moment, I realized that their attention barely mattered. What mattered was the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. The reflection I had carried within myself all those years. The acknowledgement that I could exist gently, softly, without hiding. But then came the inevitable jolt of reality. A passerby lingered just a fraction too long with their gaze, and my pulse spiked. I froze mid-step, my feet rooted to the ground. My wife's hand squeezed mine lightly, her eyes meeting mine in quiet reassurance. "Keep breathing," she said softly. "We're together." I did. Step by trembling step, we continued along the path. Each movement felt like a small victory. Each breath, a subtle reclamation. And by the time we reached the park bench, I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing, as though the act of simply existing in my own body had begun to carve out new space inside me. We sat there, side by side, watching leaves flutter in the wind. And I noticed something profound. The reflection in the window of the nearby cafe wasn't frightening anymore. It wasn't a stranger. It was me, undeniably, without pretense or armor. And for the first time, I didn't want to turn away. "I can do this," I whispered, almost to myself. "I think I can do this." She leaned against me gently, her voice soft but unwavering. "I know you can, and I'll be here the whole way." A breeze stirred, brushing strands of hair across my face. I brushed them back absently, savoring the freedom in the gesture, the quiet miracle of being seen without judgment. My body didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like home, even if that home was still unfamiliar, still forming, still raw. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part of transformation wasn't the change itself. It wasn't the fear of judgment, or the uncertainty, or the whispers of doubt that flitted through my mind like shadows. It was the courage to allow yourself to be fully visible, to step into the world as your authentic self, and to trust that love, both your own and others, could survive the revelation. The walk back home felt lighter, almost effortless. Each step was a small affirmation. I was allowed to exist, to explore, to soften. I was allowed to discover who I was, one quiet, trembling moment at a time. And with every breath, every glance, every heartbeat, the story of who I had been and who I was becoming began to merge, not as a conflict, but as a continuum, a fragile, beautiful truth taking shape. When we returned, she didn't make me feel awkward. She didn't ask a million questions or try to guide me. She simply smiled, and that smile said everything I needed to hear. You are here. You are safe. You are loved. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I believed it. The days that followed the park walk became a strange kind of rhythm. Not predictable, not easy, but a rhythm nonetheless. One that had its own pulse, its own cadence, unlike anything I'd known before. I began to notice the smallest things first. The subtle curve of my nails as I moisturized my hands in the morning, the way sunlight danced across my hair, the gentle sway of fabric around my legs when I walked. These small observations were like whispers, reminders that the person in the mirror was no longer a stranger. I was learning to live with myself, not in spite of the reflections staring back. My wife became an anchor, a steady presence I could rely on even when the waves of uncertainty and fear threatened to pull me under.
She didn't rush me.
She didn't question the pace of my transformation or the authenticity of my feelings. She simply listened, observed, supported, and in her quiet acceptance, I discovered a courage I didn't know I had. One evening, she came home with a small shopping bag. I watched her set it on the counter, curiosity lighting her eyes. I thought you might like these, she said softly, almost shyly. I approached and peeked inside. There were a few simple outfits, fabric soft to the touch, colors muted yet vibrant in a way that felt natural, almost as if they had been waiting for me to see them. I lifted a flowing blouse and ran my fingers along the material. A warmth spread through me, a combination of excitement, vulnerability, and fear. This wasn't just about clothes. It was about permission to explore, to express, to exist without apology. That night, I tried on one of the outfits alone in our bedroom. The mirror caught my reflection, and for the first time, the person looking back at me didn't feel like a secret. My posture wasn't forced, my smile wasn't rehearsed. I didn't recognize the exact face in front of me, and yet I knew it intimately, the way one knows the lines of a childhood home or the inflection of a parent's voice. I was both unfamiliar and entirely known. When my wife knocked and entered, her eyes widened, not in shock, but in awe. You look right, she said, the words small and careful. Not like someone else, not like a costume, like you. I felt tears prick my eyes, the relief so profound I could barely breathe. It wasn't about approval. It wasn't about validation from anyone but myself. But her words mattered because they mirrored the acceptance I was slowly learning to give to myself. We spent that evening together on the couch, talking and laughing, the soft glow of the lamp filling the room. I shared my fears and hopes, my insecurities and tiny victories. She shared hers. And slowly, the room became a sanctuary where authenticity wasn't frightening. It was celebrated, fragile and luminous all at once. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It didn't happen in dramatic leaps. It happened in moments like these: brushing hair, choosing clothing, speaking honestly about feelings long buried, holding hands in quiet solidarity, stepping into public with tentative courage, and returning home to share the experience with someone who truly saw me. Each day added a layer of clarity, a sliver of confidence, a whisper of identity becoming whole. I began experimenting more openly, letting myself embrace aspects of femininity I had once suppressed. The tunics, the soft fabrics, the delicate accessories, they weren't about performance. They were about inhabiting the self I had ignored, denied, and feared. I noticed the way my body moved differently in these clothes, how gestures softened, how laughter felt lighter, how my thoughts slowed when I allowed them to. Each reflection in the mirror became less a test and more a dialogue, a conversation with a self I was learning to love. And yet, there were still moments of doubt. Still moments of fear when a glance from a stranger, a lingering thought, or the echo of old expectations tried to pull me backward. But those moments became less frightening over time. With my wife beside me, each hurdle felt navigable. Each challenge became an opportunity to reaffirm that my identity wasn't a threat to anyone. It was an evolution, a reclamation, a becoming. One morning, after weeks of quiet exploration, I stood in front of the mirror and realized something profound. The person staring back at me carried traces of the man I had once been, yes, but not trapped by it, not defined by it. The lines of my face, the softening of my posture, the subtle gestures of hands and voice, they all spoke a language of self-acceptance. Not perfect, not fully defined, but true. I smiled, finally without hesitation, and whispered aloud, "This is me, all of me, and it's enough." When my wife came into the room, she didn't gasp or question. She simply smiled, stepped closer, and held me as if the weight of all my fears could dissolve in her embrace. "I see you," she said softly. "I always have." And in that embrace, something shifted completely. I wasn't just seen, I was known. Not just by her, but by myself. Not just the reflection in the mirror, but the soul that had trembled, hidden, and doubted for decades. I had finally arrived in the only place that mattered, home within myself. The journey wasn't over. It would never truly be over. Identity isn't a destination. It's a living, breathing evolution, shaped by moments, choices, fears, and courage. But in that moment, wrapped in her arms, I understood that I could meet each day as myself, without apology, without hiding, and with the love I had always longed to give and receive. And as the sunlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating the room in golden warmth, I realized the most extraordinary truth of all. Transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about uncovering the self you were always meant to be and finally letting the world, and yourself, see it. I exhaled, a long, unburdened breath, and whispered softly to the reflection that had become my companion and my guide. I am here. I am enough. I am me. And for the first time in my life, it was not just true. It was undeniable.